So you would replace Tom Brady with an average NFL quarterback, is that right?
Actually, a little bit below average. So you think about a player that may be freely available or a third stringer, something like that. That would be our idea of a replacement player, a player that's sort of freely available. Because average, especially at the quarterback position, is pretty valuable. I think, 2, 3, 4 teams make the playoffs every year with an average quarterback. It's sort of that, that player that could be, once you're down to your third stringer, that's kind of who we're comparing every single player to when we're talking about replacement, but it's sort of more glaring at quarterback.
So now we got to talk about the analytics of pro football. Look, let's not pretend that Pro Football Focus was the first to have this idea. Football Outsiders been doing this for a while, and they've been doing amazing work. And I love analytics because they tell me the things that I'm missing, a better way to look at football. And I'm going to give you an example, but, let's start with Pro Football Focus is owned by Chris Collinsworth, all right? So that's the dude calling Sunday night football games. There's money in that. And to not say that is to also miss any kind of, what we might call slant, right? And I'm glad that Chris Collinsworth is out saying that he owns this because wouldn't want anybody to think ill of Chris Collinsworth. Now, I found it interesting that one of the things that he decided to do was invest in it because he didn't feel like he knew what he was doing with it. So it's kind of like somebody that doesn't know why they like a thing, but knows that this thing is the next thing. You don't need to explain to them why it works. You just need to know that it works. And I appreciate that, right? As a person who's really trying to look at the worldview and the larger view of an organization all the time, fascinated with how organizations are built and why things work. But what Pro Football Focus has done and what analytics have done are things like this. So by way of example, let's use PFF. They found that last season the Houston Texans gave up the league worst 62 sacks. And that's a stat, and everybody knows that stat. We all know that giving up lots of sacks is bad. But what we would do intuitively is say that the offensive line was garbage. And they kind of helped us get to that conclusion by taking Titus Howard with their first-round pick, when we all thought perhaps they might take Cody Ford. We all knew that they were going to take an offensive lineman, probably an offensive tackle, because it looked like a position of need for them if you're watching film and if you are evaluating the Houston Texans week to week. But what's interesting about the analytics and what PFF found, you don't know that it's just the offensive line. You don't know that it's one player. You do know that the protection is bad. And then when you looked at who gave up the sacks, in particular, a third of those, 21, were spread across tight ends and running backs, and even quarterback Deshaun Watson. Now, that's an interesting idea, that a quarterback would be responsible for giving up his own sack, right? And according to them, he was responsible for 14 of 62 sacks allowed, which means that the offensive line was doing a job, means the tight ends were doing a job, means the running backs were doing a job, means that Deshaun Watson either ran into somebody or did not read his own play well enough. Yeah, the Texans' offensive line wasn't very good, but having the league's worst pass protection is different than not having a good offensive line. Another example, let's go to college, right? Instead of talking about Kyler Murray, let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa. Had the highest percentage of passes charted with perfect ball placement, putting it on fingertips, of any Power 5 quarterback last season. That includes Kyler Murray. And had the 7th lowest percentage of passes deemed uncatchable. So whenever Tua Tagovailoa was putting the ball in the air, most of the time he was giving his wide receivers the best opportunity in the country to catch the ball, which would also lead you to think, okay, is Jerry Jeudy really that good, or is it Tua Tagovailoa that's that good? And seeing as Tylan Wallace was catching passes from Taylor Cornelius, who didn't get drafted, and won't get drafted in the first round of any draft, like Tua Tagovailoa, I was wondering aloud, okay, so if you could see all of that, why not look at what Tylan Wallace was able to do? Because if you're evaluating the Biletnikoff Award based on a wide receiver's performance or on stats, you also got to take into account who was throwing on the ball, right? Which is one of the reasons that people would ding Marquise Brown last year for not having been a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award. It's like, hey, he got to play with Kyler Murray. Well, Jerry Jeudy got to play with Tua Tagovailoa. And I've just told you that analytics would prove he was a more accurate quarterback when we're talking about passes charted with perfect ball placement. So does that make the analytics, What did Mark Twain say? He said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Are these statistics lies? No, but we can bend them. And that's what I'm saying, is if you're wanting to find just more data to tell you how to accurately predict football, accurately scheme football, even bet football, Pro Football Focus is a good place to go, just like Football Outsiders, just like anybody who's doing data science, just like anybody who is doing math. One of my favorite follows on the Twitters is Blinken Riley. Dude is actually a mathematician, and he's used regression analysis to come up with a lot of his really awesome stats. And we enjoy this stuff because it makes us feel smart. We get to see things in a different way. And as a talk show host, my job is to provide you information and to give you a different angle to look through when we are talking about sports. And I think analytics does that in a very real and very cool way. I know that baseball has kind of had an edge on all this stuff because Bill James and the sabermetricians have been like, yeah, cool. We've been doing this for a long time. Well, you've been doing one-to-one analysis. You ever try to unpack 22 dudes doing something different over the course of 80 plays? No. You're unpacking what happens when a pitcher throws a ball, or when a hitter hits a ball, or when a shortstop fields a ball or doesn't, or an outfielder fields a ball or doesn't. And I also don't believe what Bill James has said, which is that the game is more important than the players. That if you got rid of all the players, you would still have other people to play the game, and the math would still bear out. And I'm going, yeah, but didn't nobody show up to see your algorithm, dog? Didn't nobody show up to see your quadratic equation? I showed up to see Jose Altuve just dominate. You know, I didn't go to the Tulsa Drillers game because I wanted to see great baseball. I went because I wanted to see Clayton Kershaw pitch. And I think that is the argument to make whenever somebody tells you that analytics are more important to the game. And I don't think that there's a whole lot of people that are making that point. But it is one that kind of hides in the shadows that nobody wants to speak to. You'll look at the analytics, you'll look at PER in the NBA and be like, you know who was better than LeBron James? This dude that didn't play any minutes. Yeah, okay. This is why we talk about sample size and we talk about probabilities. And all these things are important. But I think that the more data you have, the better fan you're going to be. And that's what I really want. I want to have graduate level conversations about sports where we're not always reducing it to yucks. Although I am here for the jokes, and the jokes are awesome.